and more than welcome to. Hey, what a great turnout! It's a great turnout, and I'm sure, and it's also kind of small enough that we should be able to whip around for some good questions. There's a few familiar faces in the audience. I can see, yeah, fantastic. How good! Some people from North Queensland. We've got somebody there from Canada as well. Oh, fantastic! Good to see you guys. Obviously, our marketing's worked. So, look, I'll quickly give you guys a bit of an explainer about what FarmLab is, and we'll jump into a bit of a presentation around some of the work and a bit of a case study around a project we've just finished up with Landcare, with a group of Landcare farmers to help them capture their data. We'll split the session into sort of two sessions. So very short presentation from me on the software and sort of what we did in relation to the project, followed by questions, followed by a bit of a session from Oli on soil carbon measurements and some of the really exciting projects, I would say Australia First projects that we're about to formally announce today. So that'll be really exciting. So we'll do sort of 20 minutes, 10 minutes questions, and then I'll hand over to Oli for 10, 20-minute presentation and 10 minutes of questions on the final piece. So without further ado, I will jump straight in. Can everyone give me a thumbs up, Oli, if you can see that? Excellent. Fantastic, guys. So, what we talk about sort of the farmer feedback loop and the future of environmental data. Before I explain what that is, look, FarmLab itself is really a software platform designed for consultants and agronomists to benefit the farmer. You can think of us kind of like zero accounting software, and that the farmer is the small business owner. They inherit all of this data and information about their environment, in this case, not financial data, but environmental data. But it's their consultant that kind of drives that can come over the top and do the interpretation. That consultant might be a carbon developer, it might be an agronomist. FarmLab is pretty simple to use. In fact, this case study explains how we took sort of 8 farmers and we actually had them doing their own soil testing and taking the results to a consultant for analysis, which was pretty good. And a few savings there for the farmer as well, because they got to do take their own samples. We consist of a web-based app, which is what you can see on the left there, and a mobile app, which is really designed for on-ground data collection. So what I'll be talking about today is just looking at the role farmers play in getting better environmental outcomes, which is a really key thing today, because we're seeing a big pull from supply chains, from financial institutions. We were talking to one just last week about trying to build better data sets for farmers to better evidence that they're playing a really good role when it comes to improving the environment and introducing more sustainable farming practices. We talk about the concept of banking your environmental data, because as that demand grows, you really need good solid evidence around what you've done. And that evidence is usually comes in the form of soil test results, water quality test results, on-ground sort of photos and interpretations from consultants. But the key thing is that farmers aren't alone in this space. This is where Landcare facilitators and consultants play a big role in actually using the technology on farmers' behalf. But it's important that farmers understand that, there are platforms like FarmLab and others that you may need to use to consolidate all of this data and information. So a bit about the project we ran last year. So last year, we ended up providing a bit of a presentation this year. This was a project across about 8 farmers around the New England area. So where we're based, FarmLab are headquartered out of Armidale, but we have sort of staff all around New South Wales, Queensland, and South Australia now. And we really we work closely with Ange, who's the National Landcare Farming Coordinator, along with a local Landcare group over in Tamworth, and a group of 8 farmers there that wanted to do a bit more of a quantitative assessment of their properties. And it was relatively straightforward. So we started off by providing them with what we call an environmental farm assessment for each farmer. And that was a really, we drove that process, but we brought the farmer in to understand what their property looked like digitally. And that was a really simple process. We basically just took some cadastral boundaries, so legal land titles from the farmer. That's all we need to sort of kickstart these environmental farm assessments. And then we dived and we sort of sat down with the farmer. My team here had a few education sessions. Jade, if she's involved, did a lot of the work along with Sophie up here in Armidale to work with those farmers to take them through some of the layers that we're seeing more commonly used to understand the environment. And that's things like tree cover, vegetation index, and we even do CSIRO here in Australia have a look-see tool, so a carbon estimate that looks at an estimate of carbon across the landscape and compares that to carbon estimates in the region. And that was then ground truth through some of the soil sampling. So then obviously we generated a sample plan for each farmer to use to help them sample according to their needs. But some farmers wanted to understand soil carbon, others wanted to understand soil microbiology. So we did some microbiology tests in this case. It was quite a unique little study, and most wanted to understand production potential. Farmers were, as part of that process, taught how to collect the samples and then scan and submit those samples to one of our partner labs. We used East West Environmental down in Tamworth. The samples were submitted to them, and then they magically came back and could be seen on the screen. So what did that look like digitally? And this is sort of the start. This is that first step here was really building up a picture of the farm, and that helps us determine where to collect samples from. It helps us to understand the variability in soils, which, because this was a soil sampling project, was relatively important. But that could also be important in relation to a tree plantation project, for example. Maybe you don't want to plant your trees on your best soils. Maybe you want to plant your trees around existing sort of tree belts to grow and improve them. This is what it looked like, and this is actually a really important image. So you can see here that these colors sort of represent the various soil types across the farm, and we provided these as part of that environmental farm assessment to the farmer. We ran these a few times to ensure that what the farmer knew their soil types to be did correlate with what we were able to produce through the tools and the software, and that was a much simpler process than it sounds. It was simply one of the team here pressing a few buttons and providing a map, and then just kind of tweaking some of those maps. And we were then able to create a spread of samples across that property. So you can see here we've got one sample across this, this sort of pink zone here, which was then used to navigate to with the mobile app and collect some samples on. And you can see some nice little photos on the left-hand side there. So this is after the samples have been collected, and there were some nice photos taken as part of that. We can't underestimate the importance of some of this qualitative data. So photos in particular are really, really powerful storytelling instruments. If you take some photos, keeping that as part of your environmental record can be a really powerful way to, even for you to see, look, this is how it was this time last year. If you go into another drought, you can start to understand things like ground cover, species type, a whole range of things that you just can't, or just really hard to quantify with just numbers and pictures and soil test results as well. So that was, it's part of why I've got this picture up, because you can sort of see that at that point there that, I've taken some samples, but you can get a feel for the landscape around that point there too. So once the samples were collected, we'll just cut to the next screen. We had soil test results come back and be submitted. And the results were analysed. Farmer didn't have to do much other than send some soil sample bags to the lab, and then we submitted them through the software. The results come back, they get mapped back to those locations you saw here. So we've got each of this little soil sample bag is one of those locations. But, the important thing is that mapping results back to locations, not just soil test results, biodiversity, water test results, all sorts of things, mapping them, ensuring they're mapped accurately back to a location is a really, really critical step in collecting good environmental data. In fact, if you walk away from today, the one thing the one takeaway I want everyone to bear in mind is that if a soil test result or a plant test result or a water test result isn't geo-referenced, then it doesn't have as much value, particularly for you to understand change in the future. And this is why, because we can take these results here, and we had results for carbon, nitrogen, pH, all sorts of things, microbiology as well, and we can create these amazing maps. But so this this is one of the producers we worked with. We produced some of these maps using those soil test results. So importantly, there is some on-ground information that then feeds into a model that provides, and Oli's going to take us through this in a bit more detail, but that model then provides us with a bit of spatial understanding of things like carbon, nitrogen, pH, whatever was tested. And it's a really powerful image, because when you look at this on your farm, all of a sudden you can start to, and we get these moments. We have these moments with some of the producers from the workshop, the Landcare, this case study. You get these moments where you can sort of see, all right, well, in this case, what I'm looking at is a map of carbon. We've got really high carbon in this sort of central bit. All right, what did I do there? Oh, well, I had a mixed species pasture. I've been rotationally grazing that. I've been keeping ground cover. That's why it's really high. You know, some of these areas over here, look, I've just kind of, you know, I've destocked them, but it's not a great soil type. And through this process and through really spatially understanding these, looking at these maps and sort of analyzing these maps, producers can build up a really nice picture about their own management practices, what's worked, what hasn't, what role the soils have to play in, you know, their ability to sequester carbon, to improve production, to, you know, to improve biodiversity. And biodiversity is another one that is a big up and coming one. It's not just about carbon, of course. You know, I bring up this as sort of the first slide. We do have a lot of farmers in carbon projects, and we get a lot of questions. We do have a lot of questions around soil carbon improvement, but you know, we also have things like, you know, you can create amazing maps for nitrogen, for example, as well. For pH, you know, sorry, that's a bit blurry, but pH is a great one because, and you know, toggling between them can be really powerful as well, because you can start to build up a picture of, well, look, you know, my highly productive soils are here on the eastern side of the farm. You know, pH is a bit closer to sort of 7 to about neutral. These areas on the western side of the farm aren't incredibly, you know, productive. We've got a slightly lower pH, but pH range for this region is pretty normal. But if I did want to improve it, these are the areas I could focus on. And it is all tied back to sustainability, but to longevity around farming practices, to making sure that, you know, we're managing the landscape according to the bits of the landscape, you know, according to how they need to be managed, according to soil type, according to all these things. And this is something that really your consultants will come over the top of and describe, look at, and, you know, allow you to, or certainly recommend management practice changes. So there is the last kind of component about collecting that data, if it's georeferenced, again, you know, making sure you have the exact coordinates for where those samples were collected, is that you can start to build up this amazing picture over time about changes in this case, carbon, but also nitrogen, pH, if you've made changes to pH. And you can build graphs like this. So this is some real data from a client. It goes back 10 years. They've had 10 solid years of soil testing. And it tells an amazing, I think, an incredible story about carbon levels across that farm. So this is a client that really actively manages soil carbon as part of a regenerative sort of farming practice. They are looking at sort of carbon offsets, but they've been doing this really from a very early stage, before carbon markets were even really a thing. You know, you can see back to 2012, but that graph here really shows, you know, you can see there's a massive increase over time. Now, this graph was really simple to produce. It was literally me clicking one button in FarmLab, and the graph was generated for the farm in question, because that farmer, that client, had a history that could be drawn from to produce it. And so some really powerful things. Now, I'm not saying every farmer needs a graph like this. You know, your interest may be slightly different to what you've got here, but having that data in an accessible format that can be extracted to tell a story is really critical. Because this farmer in particular, you know, they could go to a, you know, they could potentially now look at where their highest performing paddocks were in terms of carbon, look at entering those, be a bit more strategic if they did want to get into carbon offsets. But they could also similarly go to a supplier. Let's say, you know, this is a cattle farm. So let's say they wanted to go to a buyer like JBS. They could take this information. They could say, look, I am improving my farm, my soil carbon, which is a proxy for many other aspects when it comes to sustainable farming and regenerative agriculture. and they could elicit a premium for their product. And that is something we're starting to see further on down the supply chain. It's something that I think Oli will touch on in a bit more detail. But the last thing, I mean, the other thing here is not just about soils. So I've included this slide because this is something we're starting to see, and we're starting to see it globally. So this dude here is in Kenya. He's planting a bunch of mangrove trees on the coast out there. He's actually using FarmLab to do that. So we're currently working with a group called RestoreTech. RestoreTech they have a goal to plant about 300,000 trees by 2025, and as you can see, 9 million mangrove trees by 2030 across Africa. They've just completed their first initial pilot in Kenya. They've planted, I think, about 10,000 trees, and I'm not saying farmers have to go out and do this, but they've used FarmLab to identify every single one of those trees. So there is a photo against each one of those points. So you remember those points we had with the photos that we showed here on the left-hand side? There's a photo of every one of those trees. It's geo-referenced. You can see exactly the location. They've input some climate data, so they can see the conditions on the day that they were planting, and they can go back to those photos. In fact, they already are. So this project was started maybe 3 months ago. What we found was, or what they found was that they across one of the sites they had massive die-off. So maybe they lost, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 80% of their mangroves. They can go back to those sites and they can look exactly at, they can identify exactly the areas and the mangroves that died off. They can do some more testing. They can understand what went wrong, and that's what they're doing today. Importantly, as they move forward in these projects, they can take this data, they can take this information to their project funders. Now, yes, there are financial incentives for them to do this. It's not just based on, them trying to plant trees. They are being funded through larger organizations that want to use these projects to offset their own emissions, which is very much sort of the future of what we're seeing down supply chains. And so these are some very large companies, some high fashion brands and a few other global brands that you'd be familiar with, and they are funding these projects, but they need evidence. They need that data, and that's why RestoreTech have gone to the lengths they've gone to record this. Now, at the farm level, for a single farmer, we're not expecting them to take a photo of 10,000 trees, but at the same time, one photo of a plot of trees this year, looking at the growth the following year, and just taking a few photos year after year to look at how those trees have grown, how they've improved, can be a really valuable storytelling tool for not just you and Landcare, but also for buyers of your product. Now, finally, I'll just to wrap up, how do you get your data into a usable format? And look, I've got some good news here. Comes back to what I was saying at the start. You don't really have to. We work really closely with consultants. We're a software company at the end of the day, and it behoves us to make this process as simple as possible. And so we work with consultants, we work with carbon developers, we work with agronomists, and we work with farmers to make data input as simple as possible. In our case, we have a network of soil samplers that we can use across Australia to collect soil samples. So you can come to us if you wanted some soil sampling. We can coordinate those samples to be collected through our network of partners who understand how to use the software. And all that means is that you get the data back into your FarmLab account to be viewed and to be built on over time. Importantly, like I said, that third point there should be number one, but it is the most important point here. If you've got consultants out on your farm collecting samples for soil, plant, water tests, make sure they are geo-referenced. They have a latitude and longitude or northings and eastings using a compliant CRS. So most agronomist consultants worth their weight will be doing this already. If they're not, send them to us. We will teach them how to do it. We have training courses for consultants. We can do some online training for farmers. It's very, very simple, to geo-reference. In fact, it makes the entire process easier. Lastly, the last thing to remember, final point in my slide is this is farmers' data. We work to benefit the farmer at the end of the day. We are National Farmers Federation Farm Data Code compliant, meaning any data a consultant puts into FarmLab is accessible and owned by that farmer. And so we are really working more and more towards the farmer. There is a small subscription fee. It's $30 a month. It's barely anything. But the key thing is you get that data set to build up over time. So thank you. I'll open now for questions, really anything. So we'll have maybe 5-10 minutes of questions, and then I'll kick over to Oli for a bit of a really exciting, important announcement. Please.
Can I just jump in and say something, Sam? It's Angela Hammond here, the Landcare Farming Program Manager. And I just wanted to quickly say to everyone that the work that we did with Sam, I was actually acting in Jules Roberts' role, actually, as a Landcare facilitator, just up here at Tamworth, with the Tamworth Regional Landcare Association group, just because they're facilitator, they were between facilitators. And look, the capture of the data was so easy, and going onto farm and being able to geolocate, and Sam forgot to say to you, the photographs are very important. Yes, the FarmLab app, you can actually load the photos onto it. So it was actually a really important learning for us. We'd go out there and we had CSIRO involved to help us with our soil sampling with the group. We had FarmLab involved. We had some really good soil scientists locally. They were fantastic. So we went there and we took the samples, but we actually also got into the habit of taking north, south, east, west photos, because they can be loaded onto FarmLab. So those photos are important, yes, as Sam said, but Sam forgot to say that you can actually geo-reference them into FarmLab as well. So you've got the photos. And so the interesting thing that the group of farmers that I work with and the facilitators that I work with, we discussed was that thing to be able, the capacity to go, you take the photos, north, south, east and west, you take the soil sample, you get the results back. And then you can actually also kind of then relate visually those results to what's happening on the ground. And we all know that a bright green grassy area isn't necessarily indicating that it's more healthy than a brown area, because we live in the land of droughts and flooding rains, don't we? It sort of starts to educate you a bit about actually what's the chemical analysis and the microbiology we also took as part of this project. We're starting to get a great learning. And the second great learning we got from it was the most exciting webinar I've ever been on. And I don't really like webinars, I'll be honest, but the most exciting webinar, and Sam's laughing because he was on it, it was scheduled for 1 hour. It went for 2 hours and none of us wanted to leave, was when we got on and we had Sterling Robertson from CSIRO, we had Rob Banks, who's a soil scientist at Tamworth, we had Ned Skean, who's another soil scientist, we had our 8 farmer group, so our 8 sort of farmers and their family, so there's about 15 people on it. And Sam was able to pull up the FarmLab maps, and so the farmers there could go, oh yeah, so why is the carbon here a bit higher? And then Ned or Sterling, the soil scientist, would go, if you look at the map, you can see, like, Ned's quite into the geohistory. So look, that river is kind of a new feature. It's only 20 million years old compared to something else, and so it would have this impact. And because the pH is higher here, that might be why the soil carbon's different there to there. And you could look at the farmer's map, and then, as Sam mentioned, the farmer could go, oh, I know, that's right, I've been rotationally grazing up there, or I had canola in there year after year for X number of years. And you could look at the map, and the discussion was just the best, from my background years ago as an agronomist, was, you take a set of samples to a farmer and you sort of discuss them. It's a pretty dry conversation, standing in a paddock looking at a piece of paper and looking at nitrogen and potassium and, things like that, without anything to reference it. And being able to use FarmLab from a consultant's point of view, a soil consultant's point of view, was just gold. It was so engaging. And so that 2-hour webinar was the most exciting webinar, because we were all sort of, wondering and learning from it. And a learning, and something we're taking from that for Landcare Farming, is that one of our groups, that same group, the next step will be to actually delve more into the soil chemistry results via FarmLab, so that each producer and the soil microbiology results, we can discuss them in depth using FarmLab to actually see what's happening and get the input from the consultants, and then for the farmer to understand, and the farmer also to be able to help the consultant understand the practices on that farm that might have affected those results. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, but also just that the geo-referencing is so important and so easy with FarmLab, and even just the photography. I'm took hundreds of photos, of which Sam showed some, but the actual photos of the landscape and relating to soil tests and geolocating it or geo-referencing it is really, really important. So look, I'll let you guys get on to start asking questions. I just wanted to give you that bit of feedback from my experience.
Thanks, Ange. Yeah, and so do shout out if you want to put it in the chat. Go ahead and chuck questions in the chat. or just shout out. Go for it, Kate and Kate.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, Kate McCabe, grain grower in South Australia and New South Wales. Just a query just on soil testing. So we as grain producers have done 0 to 10s for probably 15 plus years. Is probably a couple of questions. Are they or have any use in sort of that longer term assessing what's happened over time? Because I imagine all your tests are 0 to 30. So first part of the question. And just the second part, I know, and Ange was at the Accounting for Nature workshop we had, and the Landcare method there is all 0 to 10s. So just, probably really interested in that 0 to 10 versus a 0 to 30, and whether our historical data is of use. So sorry, 2 questions in there, and maybe too big for you to answer all at once, but yeah.
No. It's kind of like a, what's a good analogy here? Kind of like a CT scan versus a blood test, right? You're looking for different things. So when you're looking at 0 to 10, you're really looking for nutrients, and I imagine it's a precursor to N application at the beginning of the season, because after you seed the paddock, you ultimately your driver of growth is going to be in that top 10 centimeters of soil and whatever's going on there. So so 10 centimeters in cropping systems, absolutely completely fine. Longer term, the things we look for from 0 to 30 are really SOC. So carbon, when carbon measurement's been done, it's done to a minimum of 30. Although there's some good evidence out that actually shows that you get, if you do to 50 centimeters, you're actually determining you get the most change after a management practice implementation down to 50 centimeters, which is actually kind of interesting, because we do 30 to and then 30 to X, and most of the carbon offset projects that are run in FarmLab are done down to as deep as possible. But it is horses for courses. We would always say, if you do 0 to 10, so we have some clients even doing carbon 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40, 50, 50, so forth. It's a little bit more expensive. It's a little bit more costly because you're doing, 3 times as many soil test results, but it is valuable for sort of bringing out some of the agronomic diagnoses for that top 10 centimeters, while still looking at some of the effects deeper down the profile. So my answer to you is, I think your measurement protocol, again, to be, you've got to have a chat to your consultant about this. We would suggest, whatever your consultant is testing for, that they will know the optimal ideal depth for what they want to look at. South Australia cropping, we are seeing a lot of subsoil constraints now starting to be assessed, and there's a pretty nifty tool that's just come out from University of Queensland that looks at it's called Constraint ID, and it looks at subsoil constraints, and that testing needs to be done down to sort of 60-90 centimeters, so quite deep, because what you're trying to address there is roots grow, and then they kind of stop because there's a constraint there, and they kind of which impacts the crop on top. And so those, again, horses for courses, those tests, if you're looking for subsoil constraints, will be done deeper down the profile. I think it's about if I was to hazard a sort of suggestion or recommendation around a process, it would be look at your nutrients and agronomic inputs and get your agronomist continuing to do your 0 to 10s. And then once every 3 years, starting as soon as possible, look at a deeper test for carbon, for constraints, for a whole bunch of things, which don't change too frequently. So they're not things you need to do every year, but every 3 or 4 years. So again, just like your blood tests with your doctor, your CAT scans, all the health things that we go through, you want to have your regular GP visits, but then every few years you want to have some deeper diagnoses to pick up longer term trends, and that's very similar to what we suggest around from a landscape perspective there. Okay.
Thank you.
No, pleasure. What is the benefit of testing deeper than 30 centimeters? So question from Melanie Leather. What is the benefit of testing deeper than 30 centimeters? It's not a requirement for a soil carbon project. Look, the easy answer, and you're going to hate this, is you're leaving money on the table if you don't. So you will increase carbon down to 30 centimeters, but that carbon, what we're starting to see, okay, so this is anecdotal, but FarmLab have a lot of data now. We probably about 30% of Australia's soil carbon projects are run on the software today. So we see a lot of information through the platform. What we tend to see after about 4 or 5 years is carbon top out in the top 30 centimeters. So whatever the soil climate limiting factors are, kind of prevent you from increasing carbon above X% with a single management practice at 30 centimeters, but carbon will continue to then improve deeper down in that profile. And that's really interesting. So if you stop measuring to 30 centimeters, 5 years, yeah, you'll start to see an increase, but then you're kind of forgetting that actually there's going to be stuff that starts to happen deeper on down the profile, which is super fascinating. And that's, we absolutely want to measure that. So we say for carbon projects, go as deep as possible. There is a mandatory reporting requirement to the government on the top 30 centimeters. So there's always going to be a 30 centimeter test. But to be honest, if you just do 0 to a meter, you would get a really good idea of what the change is, a better idea of what the change is. But 0 to 30 and 30 to X is kind of where it's at now with the methodology. What is the cost to access and use FarmLabs for a farmer? $30 a month, but you can also access it if your consultant uses it. You should be able to get it for free, and they should be able to produce all their reports in FarmLab and just shoot you those reports. So bottom line is, should be no cost for every farmer in Australia to use it if we can convince Elders and Nutrien and every other large consultancy to adopt it. Unfortunately, I think we're taking a bit of a pincer movement. We're convincing, absolutely working with consultants, but we are also ensuring that farmers understand the benefit of that data and have access to that data over time, because PDF spreadsheets and Excel reports in your top drawer of your filing cabinet don't cut it anymore when it comes to just production and sustainability in general. It's kind of both. So $30 a month. We do an environmental farm assessment for about $500, which is a setup of the farm. We take you through all that data and we do a bit of an education session there. So it's very, very good value for money for that initial sort of farm setup too.
And can I just say, Sam, that to Jules and Kate and a few people that are on, and Mel Leather, when we have our catch up about the Landcare Farming project groups, we will be discussing this, because the group at Tamworth basically went down that path of environmental farm assessment and the soil testing, and we'll just talk about the benefits of that, and then look whether there's a way that Landcare Farming can kind of work with you guys to align with FarmLab and to get some of that happening. So yeah, we'll be working on that, guys. So anything that comes up in your mind today also that relates to kind of what Landcare Farming can support you with FarmLab, please bring it back to us. You know that we're always an open book and we're always keen to look at opportunities.
And Kylie, from I can see your question there about for consultants. So consultants usually pay to use advanced features in FarmLab. So they might like to do some modeling and some stratification. So there's an additional cost there. It usually starts from about $250 a month. They get 5 farms and they can do, some of the deeper sort of modeling. So create some of those nice maps I showed you, use the analytics widget. We do also handle payment for lab testing as well. So we work directly with most soil testing labs around Australia now, which means that you can, consultants can submit samples straight to those labs and have the results. The lab uses our backend and map the results straight back into FarmLab. So there's no having to import, export spreadsheets or soil test results. It makes it really, really simple. And so we usually charge a small fee per sample for that. That's covered on top of the soil test cost itself. So if there's no more burning questions, I might hand over to Oli. So we've got, if you guys don't know Oli Madgett, then maybe I may have been living under a rock, because Oli Madgett is probably, well, no, I'm joking. But if you're in South Australia and you don't know Oli, and you're into ag tech, then you might be living under a rock. So Oli has joined FarmLab recently. He is our head of special projects, or VP of special projects, and is looking after some really exciting projects for us at the moment. So Oli, I can see your screen coming up now. I'm going to kick over to you and take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam and Ange. So just kind of kicking off, obviously I'm wearing mainly my FarmLab hat today, but I just also wanted to mention that I'm also a grape grower. So I'm calling in from McLaren Vale here in South Australia. And just to point out what has been happening to us as grape growers recently. So we supply to Treasury Wine Estates, so the biggest brand in Australia. There's about 80 of us growers just in McLaren Vale. And what has happened, like I'm going to touch on carbon and some of the projects that we have happening here in FarmLab, but I think the wine industry is a bit of a canary in the coal mine in terms of what might well start filtering into other parts of agriculture. So Treasury Wine Estates, as you know, wine industry is on a little bit of a down cycle at the moment, and Treasury Wine Estates has actually just a couple of years ago actually renegotiated its debt. I think it must have over $1 billion worth of debt, went off to Singapore and the financial markets, and when it got its new debt, that came as a part of basically a green loan. So it was a sustainability linked financing, and that had a whole load of metrics that tied Treasury to for their own emissions and their own energy that they consume, but also it has a load of points around it that will relate to us as growers and suppliers to Treasury as one of the big parts of their scope 3 emissions. And actually that's practically meant that already that is filtering down to us as little growers for Treasury. So the practical impacts of that has been that about 2 years ago, our contracts changed with Treasury, where we could only supply to them going forwards. We were given about a year's notice if we became certified sustainable. So we have a sustainability scheme for our wine industry called Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. And a lot of us had already been just reporting using the platform every year, but suddenly we actually needed to be certified growers. So we have Fresh Care coming every 2 years to certify us. And again, if we drop out of certification, we will no longer have contracts. So this is this whole kind of world of sustainability and financing sustainability that's actually starting to hit us as growers. And it's challenging. I'm getting recertified in February. I was just saying to Angie ahead of this call, just the way it works for us as grape growers, the first time you go through the process, you get a tiny bit of leniency. You're allowed to have like things that you need to get in place by the next time that you are certified. But all of a sudden, that 2nd year anniversary is coming up for us in February. And actually, I really do need to be able to have all our data in order. I need to also, I need to be able to prove everything out. And actually, one of the changes you have to commit to making significant management changes as well as a part of the program. So one of the things that we did was to commit to both baselining the soil carbon in our vineyard and actually adopting a whole load of management practices to increase it, which is one of the reasons that I got into this space and now get to work with FarmLab on a special project that we have around the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. So basically, as you guys will know, this whole area of carbon is actually, you probably call it quite chaotic and confusing. And it's really hard to know what to do as a farmer. And, I'm a grape grower and I work in this space, and I find it hard to know exactly what we really should be doing. And so I just want to touch on what's kind of where we are today, but also where we're going to be going over the next few years and why we are reaching a critical time point in terms of getting the data in place to move this whole carbon area forwards. So, working in soil carbon, just the basic initial challenge of baselining soil carbon with a high degree of confidence and fidelity is a really wicked challenge. So as you guys are, most of you will be landholders, you'll know the variability of soil across your landscapes. So you appreciate that when we have a current soil carbon methodology that's basically designed to around physical soil sampling, and it's creating a sampling approach that is aimed at picking up some samples that highlight the higher end of carbon you have on that landscape, and also they're hoping to be able to pick up your lower end of carbon across that landscape. But when you can lodge, you can actually theoretically you could have 1,000-hectare farm, and you could take as few as 9 soil cores. Those soil cores only have to have an internal diameter of 38 millimeters or more. And you can imagine with just 9 soil cores across 1,000 hectares, actually there's quite a low level of confidence that those actual sample results really do reflect the actual variability of soil carbon across your farm. And you know that intrinsically as a farmer, but also the Clean Energy Regulator realizes that as well. And that's why they see that currently, basically the only way that you can achieve confidence when you're doing sampling only is to take more samples. So actually, you need to start taking, let's say, up to kind of 30, 40 samples across 1,000 hectares to have, a really high level of confidence that you've picked up that variability correctly. And that's what is driving the cost of soil carbon quantification up to these levels of kind of $20 a hectare, $30 a hectare. And the government has acknowledged that this is a wicked challenge, and they created the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge as one of these technology challenges to try and solve these very hard things that Australia faces. And their objective is to be able to bring the costs down from kind of 15, 20 hectares today, right down to $3 a hectare over the coming years. And it's our belief that it's going to be the reduction in sampling and the reduction in density in sampling that's going to help us to get there. So just as I said, and this is a project that we run with the University of Queensland, and just to kind of show the way that technology is moving, obviously on the left-hand side, you'll see kind of the quid pro quo of today, where you could take as few as 9 samples. And the approach that we're doing, working with technology companies like AgriCircle from Europe, is that they are basically building models of soil carbon. So those models have a whole load of features around them. Think of them a bit like kind of layers of a cake. And some of those layers might actually just be the reflectance that you get back from either plant matter or you get back from the soil, or other layers might be climatic layers, or they might be topographical layers. But there's all these layers that are used to build up this model. And then you use physical soil sampling to help localize that model. So you might make a model for the whole of the central west New South Wales, and that actually, you might get to a point where at that geography scale, you actually can get to a point where it can, with enough sampling, can quite accurately reflect actually the carbon distribution across the whole of central west New South Wales. But when you come right down to a farm level, those models just on their own, like those just using remotely sensed data, tends to not be very, very accurate. So we actually need to use physical soil samples to help basically calibrate them down to reality, because stuff from space actually can't see into the Earth. So we actually need to take physical samples, and it's very likely that we're going to not move on from a point where we still need to take samples over the coming years. It's just that our aim is to take a lot less samples, and for those samples to really inform technology. So this is our project with the University of Queensland. So we're at this critical point, like to move this whole space forwards. Like Sam has worked for a number of years around data in soils. And I think one of the drivers for FarmLab originally was just actually helping to structure data around soils correctly and scalably, and to empower everybody. And in the soil carbon space, we're at exactly that same point where we are at this critical juncture where we need to get the scale of data in place that helps us to really power innovation, whether it's innovation from the likes of ourselves or the University of Queensland or all these other innovators in our ecosystem. So our project is going to be working and funding the baselining of soil sampling across 430 farms. So we're just starting. This is kind of one of our initial announcements here on this session. So we're going to be baselining and wanting to work with 80 farms across, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, 30 farms in Tasmania. And again, raised a question about why Northern Territories is missing. And it might be possible if there are some farmers in Northern Territories that we might be able to request that they're also included as well. But yeah, that's a significant, we have until basically very early 2025 to work over 430 farms. It's a massive project. We've been standing up with the soil sampling teams that FarmLab has already been working with. We've now onboarded them so that they are positioned all around Australia to be able to actually go out and take those soil samples. But this is a major project. We have over $4 million worth of funding, so it's a significant piece of work. And for producers that are interested in the project, I just wanted to actually just break down practically what it is and what you do and how you could qualify for it. So essentially what we're working on doing is the project will be able to baseline up to about 200 hectares of your farm. So we can't, for major farms, we wouldn't be able to baseline the whole of your farm. This isn't something that you can actually use to kind of lodge yourself in the emissions reduction fund. But if you're at a starting point today where actually, like us as grape growers, we don't know where we really are today, this project is really ideal at giving you that starting point. And in exchange for you sharing your data with us as innovators and the Australian government, will essentially cover all of those costs of doing the baselining and lab testing. So 200 hectares, we're basically, think of it like A/B testing. We're looking to work with farmers where we can identify 2 zones to sample in. Each of those zones anywhere from kind of 20 to 50 hectares up to 100 hectares. And we want there to be some difference between those zones. There's quite a lot of flexibility in what that practically means. So it could be that you're on a mixed farming operation and, this zone up here, the northern zone is at the moment in its kind of cropping cycle, and the southern zone is used for kind of pasture and it's in that part of its cycle. Or it could be that, you might have set stocking rates in a part of your farm, in a part of your property, and you might be using time controlled grazing in another, or you might have improved pasture in one area and you haven't, and it's kind of native grazing in the other area. Or it might be as simple as actually, like last year, I have changed a rotation and I'm planting legumes and the rest of the farm is being in wheat and barley. So quite a lot of flexibility there, but we need these 2 zones. We'll help, and the team will help you to do the mapping, and a couple of the team are on the call today. So we are making this as frictionless as possible for producers. We then, on each of those 2 zones, we basically 9 sampling locations are dropped by the algorithm at specific points on your farm, and the algorithm's determining where it wants to go and take those samples. So you'll have 18 points across those 2 areas, and in each of those 18 points, we'll be taking a sample down to 60 centimeters at depth, and there'll basically be 2 subsamples that are sent to the lab. So you'll have a 0 to 30 centimeter sample and a 30 to 60 centimeter sample. So essentially you get 36 soil test results back for your property. This is kind of us. We've just been basically out there doing a lot of our initial testing. So we use FarmLab, that mobile app that Sam showed you, to actually direct the soil samplers to go out to those locations accurately. So they need to get to that exact spot. We take the samples, obviously measure out the top 30 centimeters and then the 30 down to 60 centimeter sample. And then the FarmLab on the sampling bags, we use the FarmLab app to take a picture of those barcodes, and that then geo-references that sample for when it then heads off to the lab. And just wanted to show you actually what happens to a soil sample when it goes to the labs for soil carbon testing. So it goes in, gets air dried, and then they grind the sample so that we remove any rock fragments or any roots that are above 2 mil in diameter. So that gets moved, and then it gets, essentially there is a bit of splitting. There's a riffle splitter which splits the sample, and then because we have to, as a part of our project, make a small, so that sample is completely mixed. We make a small subsample of that available to CSIRO and the National Soil Inventory, so that they can actually build up a really good repository of physical soil samples. But the majority of the sample then goes through the process of both getting the soil organic carbon percentage and also initially getting your bulk density data through as well. So, and then you as a grower then get, via the FarmLab app, you'll then get your soil carbon percentage and your soil carbon stock levels back. So yeah, we'll use the app to make sure that you actually, as a part of being within the project, actually get an understanding, and that will help you, and we make it possible, we make it easy for you to share that with your agronomists or people that you're working with in Landcare to help advise you, so that actually it can be a first step into your journey on working out where you are today, what potential you might have, and what you should do next. As I said, one of the things that we have to do, and super transparent around this with the documentation that you have to sign, it's quite a simple process, but we need to, like this project, as well as us helping to show that we can use technology to massively reduce the cost for future farmers, we are putting in place a really important legacy for Australian agriculture, that the data set is in place for future innovators as well as ourselves. So you've got to be okay with sharing the data back with the Australian government. And I just wanted to show another thing that we do within the project. So obviously we're going out there and we're working with these 430 farms to build up the data set that models need to calibrate themselves. But we also, these are probably not your farms, these are more likely, or they are at the moment, research farms. So we work with the likes of PIRSA in South Australia, and some of their research farms we hypersample, but that sample data we hold it in escrow. So that data isn't available for any technology innovators, but we've taken a ton of samples from it. So generally about 100 samples versus just the normal 36 that you'd get for your farm. And then that means that we have these blind farms where we can also, with the people with the University of Queensland, we can get the AgriCircle team to use just their model initially with no data from the farm, and we can get them to make a quantification of what their model says the soil carbon stock levels are of that area. And then we can compare that first modeled output against basically we call it the sample truth. So the tons of samples that we've taken, which are the closest to the truth that we can create, and we compare that result. And I just want to, some of our work has kind of been built off some previous work with Meat and Livestock Australia as a part of CN30 and AgriFutures. And we've done some of this initial blind validation testing. And typically we find that when you come down to that per farm level, often if you don't get any data from that farm, you can often be quite a way away from the truth. So you could be 25% or more away from the truth. So obviously that isn't rigorous enough to actually be practically useful, but we are increasingly demonstrating that just with a very few number of samples from a farm to tighten that model up against actually that real farm, we see massive, massive gains in the performance of those models. And that's basically the essence of what we're trying to achieve, is that, for a few $1,000s versus maybe $10,000, we'll be able to baseline farms with the right, where their data has the required level of confidence for that to be lodged under the emissions reduction fund or some other repository that exists. And that might be, like we want to do as a grape grower, just to inset, we want to share that data with Treasury Wine Estates, who who we sell our grapes to, so that over time, when we can show that we are actually building soil carbon over 3, 5, 10 years, we can net off some of that sequestration against our emissions. And this is, again, an area that we've done, an area that we've been working with in Australia, where we've actually got towards that critical mass of data. So yeah, we've worked with a number of farms in this region, and we've got to a point where the model is able to create a soil carbon quantification at a per paddock level. And this is kind of where we'd love to get to for producers right across Australia, that once you get to these levels of data, we'll be able to help to demonstrate that a lot of those farmers that have adopted practices like time control grazing or cover cropping, or been really early on in stopping tillage, like that, they hopefully appear as outliers compared to the regional mean of soil carbon. So that scale on the right hand side that you'll see is not soil carbon percentages. That's just, when you just look at the mean of just that geography. So that's just one basically NRM region. So we're not trying to compare the whole of Australia. It's actually hyper localized. Like, where do your farms and your paddocks fit against the average of that region? So that's where we hope to be able to get to. We would love, obviously, we've got this massive challenge ahead, and we need the support of farmers who want to work with us and to be baselined. So I'm going to pop up a URL in a second if you're keen to be a part of the program. We have a load of flexibility. So Sam, I think, is just about to hopefully drop that in the chat, and I'm going to go to it in just a second as well. In the form, we tried to make it as simple as we can, and we'll help with the mapping. But one other thing that we do is we have got a space, if there's any agronomists that you want to share our data with, or your Landcare advisor, please pop that in. And there's also an area where you can let us know when you would want to be sampled, because we're really conscious. Obviously, a lot of people have got crops in the ground and emerging, and probably don't want us sampling over the top of them right at this point. So if you want to say, we'd like you to come back in, post-harvest, that's absolutely fine. We'll work within those timeframes. There are some things that we have to logistically do where we aim to clump farmers together. So we'll come to a particular region. So we might do, cropping around the Riverina in January time, and try and pick up everybody in the Riverina at that same time. But we're working to be as flexible as we can. Please do feel free to get in contact via any of those routes. And if you're keen to be a part of the project, please just go to getfarmlab.com/carbon, and everything is there. Hopefully it should take you about 5 to 10 minutes to do what you need, and we would love to be able to work with you. And also, I just wanted to kind of end on the fact that, like I've said, this is a really, we've got probably quite a unique opportunity with the funding that we've got to genuinely move this forwards for lots of producers in Australia. So yeah, we're taking that opportunity and that responsibility really seriously. So it would be great if you could help us to absolutely make the most of the chance we've been given. And thank you as well for the University of Queensland and Ziltech and EAL Labs and AgriCircle and all the people that have been helping contribute to the project. And again, to Ange and the Landcare team for supporting us as well.
Brilliant, Oli. And just I'll just add to that, spots are available. I mean, this is the first day we're publicly announcing this. So getting quick, we do have up to 430 farms worth of subsidy, but we only have 80 for most states and 30 for Tassie. So if I think we have 31, 32 filled so far across New South Wales and South Australia. I think the majority of those are in New South Wales. So do get in quick if you're in New South Wales. We'd love to see you in. I could see, yep, Richard, thanks. Definitely big opportunity there. But get it now. And I think, Kate, back to your question about 0 to 30 centimetre samples, if you've got a couple of paddocks here, we'll cover all of those testing costs and sampling costs for those 2 paddocks if you did want to get in, and Oli's in South Australia too. So we've been, very SA focused as far as getting samplers on board over there as well. But thanks, Oli. That's Brilliant. Does anyone have any questions for Oli on the project front? Feel free to jump in. I think the key thing, sampling bush blocks. Yeah, look, if it's farmed, absolutely. I think we're doing a few. I think we've done a few bush blocks actually. But mind you, you've got to have a farming practice on those blocks. So you would want to see it grazed ideally, not just remnant veg. That's probably the only other caveat to doing that sampling, right, Oli? Yeah. The other thing is the so what behind this. We do want to use this to activate farmers. We part of the reason we're working with Ange on this and to offer it sort of exclusively through this Landcare network especially is because we want to make sure that the data can be used and will be used by people that really care about this kind of information, so soil carbon, and really sort of looking for avenues to manage and to understand their own practice, their own effects of their own practice on soil carbon and other things to act on that knowledge. And so there's a really rich there'll be a really rich set of data that comes out of this. So we really want to push the Landcare angle. We know you all deeply care about this. If you have interested farmers who we contact directly, I think Oli's about to answer that one. Absolutely there, Emma. There we go. Yeah, so Oli's just said, just come through and register it, get farmlab.com/carbon. There are a few forms there. There are a few forms there in terms of consent forms, et cetera. If we do hit the limits early, we will be sort of striking off the states as we hit the limits on the states. So just bear that in mind. But look, rest assured, if you get in today, tomorrow, Friday, Thursday, Friday, you'll probably be right.
The nice thing is for us Landcare farming people, and let's all jump into it, is this is the first time this has been made publicly available, so aren't we lucky? But I think I'll just send a message to Jules and Mel, for example, and a few other people with our existing Landcare farming groups. Not that it has to be exclusively those, but if you're keen to jump in, let me know and we can just start locking in numbers with Sam, I reckon. Like, we've already got groups that are collaborating, and I think some of those groups would be very keen to investigate this. And also because Sam and I've had discussions around sort of soil testers around different areas and that sort of a thing. So there's sort of a few different levels we need to manage. So if you can, anyone on here via Landcare Farming, please get in touch and we'll take some next steps.
And I'll tell you, if you're a Western Australian farmer, come on, crikey, get involved, because we want to hear more from the West. Have we got anyone from Western Australia here? Stick your hand up if you're from WA. We haven't forgotten about you. I don't know if there is anyone, Ange, but and look, Ange will send out. Ange will be sending out a bit more information post this, just in terms of the website, where to sign up. You can watch the video online. It's fantastic. We didn't show you today because we want to make sure you do come to the website eventually to see that amazing video. In a past life, Oli was actually a TV producer, so he's done a very good job at at the video, the videography, which is fantastic.
And look, Jules and co, the video will be a really great thing to send around to some of the groups just to explain. It's very short, snappy, just explains it really well. And so if we want to sort of engage people, it's a really nice, easy way to do it. So we'll send that out after this afternoon.
Cool. I'll wrap it there. If we don't have any more questions, Ange, probably.
And just remember, everyone, if you've got friends around that are interested in this, we are running another one at 6 o'clock tonight. We decided to run one then as well, because a lot of people, sort of would rather get on at night time, because, when you're a farmer, work out in the paddock's the only work that's work. So once you come inside and onto a webinar, we thought there might be some people at 6 o'clock tonight. So we've got another one tonight. This is recorded and I will send it out afterwards. So please reach out to anyone that hasn't seen this, share the recording, which I'll share with you, but also let them know it's on tonight, but also let them know just to reach back. Sam, Oli, always very happy to answer questions, and so am I, or to put you in touch with the relevant people. I think this is a great opportunity we should all jump on and make the most of.
Fantastic. And the last thing to add, if you get the data, we are offering, you can do the environmental farm assessment if you want to come in and do that at a later date. You can do that before, doesn't really matter. It just adds an extra little piece of information, a bit more information to that. You will get those regional averages if you do an environmental farm assessment. So we'll actually do a look-see report alongside those soil test results. So you'll be able to see where you sit in relation to a 100-kilometre radius of soil carbon there too. So don't forget the EFA, very important. And I think, there'll be quite a few producers that get a little bit more out of it. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And everyone just also recognise Accounting for Nature also does a bit of, FarmLab and Accounting for Nature work alongside each other very closely. So any of us that have been involved in the Accounting for Nature work, there is the opportunity for us to actually use FarmLab to collect some of the data with the Accounting for Nature, within the Accounting for Nature type framework. So just remember that. So look, thank you everyone, and please reach out if there's any more questions. And Landcare Farming, anyone there that wants me to support anything around this, just reach out and let me know, and we'll see if we can get some sampling done. Actually, the other thing I was going to say that I forgot is that a really great thing around this opportunity that a couple of the really good soil scientists and consultants are looking into is the option for, if this soil testing is being done via FarmLab and UQ, where you're getting some subsidy for the testing to come onto the property and be started, there is the opportunity with a bit of your own personal primary producer input to actually extend the quality of that testing. So you can get the carbon testing done as per this project, but if you decide you also want to get some other production parameters tested more deeply, there could be the opportunity to do that, because obviously if that rig's going on to your property to take those soil tests, it's neither here nor there. If you then decide, if you want to take more tests, obviously you need to pay for those tests, but you're not paying for the rig to come onto the property, which is often the big cost. So there are some consultants already who are doing some really great packages around production parameters, and also including the possibility for microbiology testing to be done alongside what it's separate to what FarmLab's doing, but aligned. Do you know what I mean? So just think about those opportunities. If you're getting those tests done around soil carbon, but you'd like to get deeper testing done, it's worth the conversation with the soil tester who needs to be accredited to do the FarmLab work. The discussion with them could make it a really valuable, a doubly, triply valuable opportunity, not around just soil carbon, it could be around other parameters that you're interested in. So, okay, has anyone got any questions before we sign off? No? Well, look, thank you so much, Oli and Sam, for your great information. I'll send out the meeting recording to everyone, and please get in touch if you've got any questions, and thanks for coming on today, and I'm sure I'll be in touch with a lot of you later on.
Thanks, Ange.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.